Elizabeth Báthory is remembered as the most prolific female serial killer in history. A Hungarian countess accused of torturing and murdering 650 young women inside her castles. According to the legend, she did not kill for money, revenge, or political power. She killed for blood. Bathory supposedly believed that bathing in the blood of young virgins would preserve her beauty and stop her from growing old. It is the story that made her the Blood Countess, history's female Dracula, but almost every famous detail in that story has a problem. The investigators who built the case against her never accused her of bathing in blood. The number 650 came from a missing book that no one could produce. Many witnesses had never seen her kill anyone. Some of the most important confessions were extracted through torture, and Elizabeth herself was never given a public trial. Yet girls connected to her households really did disappear. Bodies were allegedly found. Servants described acts of horrifying violence. So what actually happened inside Elizabeth Báthory's castles? Was she one of history's greatest monsters? Or did politics, torture, and 400 years of storytelling transform a brutal noblewoman into something even worse? Elizabeth was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful families in the Kingdom of Hungary. The Bathory family controlled vast estates and held important political positions across Central Europe. This was not a peaceful world. Hungary stood between Habsburg and Ottoman power, and war shaped almost every part of life. Castles were not simply grand homes. They were fortresses, military centers, and symbols of authority. At around 11 years old, Elizabeth was engaged to Ferenc Nadasdy, the heir to another wealthy family. They married when she was approximately 14. Ferenc later became a feared military commander in the wars against the Ottoman Empire. While he was away fighting, Elizabeth helped manage their estates. She oversaw property, finances, legal disputes, and the large households attached to several castles. She was educated, wealthy, and unusually powerful. And that power may be the most important part of the entire story, because the first girls who reportedly suffered inside her homes were almost powerless. Young peasant women were regularly recruited as servants. Later testimony described punishments that were violent even by the brutal standards of the period. Girls were allegedly beaten for small mistakes. Some were burned with heated metal, others were stabbed with needles, deprived of food, or forced to stand outside in freezing weather. Cruel treatment of servants was common among the nobility, but the rumors around Elizabeth's household went much further. Girls entered her service and never returned home. Bodies were allegedly buried in secret. Parents asked what had happened to their daughters. But poor families had little chance of challenging one of Hungary's richest noblewomen. For years, the rumors remained rumors. Then Elizabeth made a mistake. She began accepting the daughters of lesser noble families into her household. These girls had something the earlier victims did not: relatives with influence. And when noble daughters began dying, people with power finally started asking questions. By then, Elizabeth's position had changed. Her husband died in 1604. She became a wealthy widow, controlling large and strategically important estates. She also became more politically vulnerable. King Matthias II ordered Hungary's Palatine, György Thurzó, to investigate the accusations. Thurzó's investigators traveled through the region collecting testimony. Eventually, more than 300 people were questioned. At first, that number sounds devastating. 300 witnesses, surely that meant the case was overwhelming. But when the testimony is examined more closely, the certainty begins to disappear. Many witnesses had never seen Elizabeth kill anyone. They repeated stories heard from servants, villagers, or other members of her household. Some had seen girls with terrible injuries. Others described suspicious burials or bodies being removed at night. A smaller number claimed to have witnessed Elizabeth taking part in torture herself. The stories were horrifying. Girls were allegedly struck until their bodies became swollen. Needles were pushed beneath their fingernails. Their skin was burned. Some were starved. Others were taken outside during winter, covered with water, and left to freeze. But the investigation had no detectives, no autopsies, and no confirmed list of hundreds of victims. There were rumors, there were frightened servants, and there were accusations spreading through a region already prepared to believe the worst. Then, on December 29, 1610, Thurzo arrived at Chaktich Castle. Later versions of the story claim that he burst in and found Elizabeth covered in blood, personally torturing a young woman. It is one of the most famous scenes in the entire legend. It is also probably invented. Contemporary accounts do not clearly describe a dramatic red-handed capture. Thurzo reportedly found one girl dead and another injured or dying. Elizabeth and several members of her household were detained. The investigation now had bodies. It also had suspects. But the evidence was about to become even more complicated. 4 servants believed to be Elizabeth's accomplices were interrogated. They included Dorothea Sentes, Ilona Jo, Janos Uivari, and Catalin Benica. Their confessions became the center of the case. They described years of torture and death. They claimed Elizabeth personally participated. They said she ordered others to help her. But some of those confessions were produced under torture. That matters because a person in unbearable pain does not necessarily tell the truth. They say whatever might make the pain stop. The servants also disagreed about the number of victims. One estimate suggested around 36. Others gave different numbers. None produced a verified list containing hundreds of names. The servants were quickly tried. Dorothea Sentes and Ilona Jo were mutilated before being burned. Janos Uivari was beheaded and his body was burned. Catalin Benica received a life sentence. Elizabeth did not stand beside them in court. And this is where the most famous number in the story appears, 650. That number did not come from 650 discovered bodies. It did not come from 650 families identifying missing daughters. It did not even come from the servants' confessions. A witness named Susanna claimed that a court official had seen a private register containing the names of 650 victims. The official did not confirm this in his own testimony. The register was never presented. No one has ever found it. Yet the number survived. Later, writers repeated it. Then other writers repeated them. Eventually, 650 stopped sounding like an unverified claim and started sounding like established fact. That single number transformed Elizabeth Báthory from an accused murderer into the most prolific female serial killer in history. But the most famous part of the legend was still missing: the bloodbaths. The original investigation did not accuse Elizabeth of filling a bathtub with blood. There was no claim that she drank blood. There was no evidence that she believed blood could preserve her youth. That story appeared much later. One version says Elizabeth struck a servant and noticed that the girl's blood made the skin on her hand appear younger. She then supposedly began murdering virgins to collect enough blood to bathe in. It is a perfect horror story. It connects murder with vanity. It turns aging into a motive. And it transforms a violent aristocrat into something supernatural. But there is no reliable contemporary evidence that it happened. The bloodbath story became popular because it was unforgettable, not because it was proven. So if the two most famous claims, 650 victims and bathing in blood, are both questionable, was Elizabeth innocent? Not necessarily. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. The collapse of a legend does not erase the suffering described in the testimony. Multiple witnesses spoke of wounded, tortured, or dead girls connected to Elizabeth's households. Some accounts directly accused her of participating. Even if the exact number is unknown, something deeply violent may have been happening inside her estates. The real question is not whether every legend was true. It is whether genuine crimes were exaggerated into something monstrous. And there were powerful reasons for exaggeration. Elizabeth was a wealthy widow controlling valuable land. King Matthias reportedly owed money to her family. Removing her from power could weaken the Bathory estate and benefit political rivals. A public trial could have opened the door to confiscating property, damaging alliances, and humiliating several powerful families. But a trial also carried risks. Elizabeth's relatives had influence. A scandal could spread far beyond one castle. So an arrangement was made. Her servants were tried and punished. Elizabeth was confined inside Choctysha Castle. She was never publicly tried. The popular version says she was sealed inside a room with only narrow openings for food and air. She may instead have been held under guarded house arrest in part of the castle. Either way, she never regained her freedom. She died in August 1614, approximately 3.5 years after her confinement. She was 54 years old. The fact that she never faced trial created two completely different versions of the truth. In one version, Elizabeth was guilty and protected by her rank. Her servants were tortured and executed while the wealthy countess avoided the same fate. From this perspective, her missing trial is not evidence of innocence. It is evidence of privilege. In the other version, the entire case was shaped by political ambition. A powerful widow was removed. Her lands were neutralized. Her servants were tortured until they confessed. Rumors became testimony. Testimony became history. From this perspective, Elizabeth was not protected from justice. She was condemned without ever being allowed to defend herself. Both versions have serious weaknesses. The conspiracy theory can minimize the accounts of real victims. The traditional story accepts every rumor, every tortured confession, and every later invention as fact. Neither gives us a complete answer. Elizabeth Báthory almost certainly did not bathe in the blood of virgins. There is no solid evidence that she killed exactly 650 people. But it is also difficult to believe that every report of torture, injury, and death around her households appeared from nothing. The most likely truth may be far less supernatural and far more disturbing. Elizabeth may have been a cruel and abusive noblewoman whose authority allowed violence to continue unchecked. Her servants may have committed crimes for her, with her, or because they believed she expected it. Political enemies may then have taken those real crimes and exaggerated them until they became impossible to separate from fiction. A guilty woman could still have been framed for crimes she did not commit. A politically motivated investigation could still have uncovered genuine abuse. Privilege, murder, and conspiracy can exist in the same story. And that may be why the legend has survived for more than 400 years. The truth is not clean enough to be satisfying. The real Elizabeth Báthory was buried beneath 3 different creations. The woman her enemies described, the woman later writers invented, and the vampire popular culture wanted her to become. Somewhere beneath them was a real countess, real servants and real girls who entered her castles and did not come home. We may never know exactly how many died. We may never know which accusations Elizabeth personally committed. But we do know this. The woman who supposedly murdered 650 virgins and bathed in their blood was created after the investigation was over. The legend made her immortal. And whether Elizabeth Báthory was a protected killer or a condemned scapegoat, the Blood Countess became history's final verdict in a trial she never received.